Hello and welcome to Your Business, Your Wealth. I'm Paul Adams. I am the CEO of Sound Financial Group, and I'm joined by somebody that you all know and love, and you especially love when he's back because you're not listening to me alone by myself in this empty room, giving you the thoughts off the top of my head. Corey, how was your trip?
So amazing. It is me, if anyone doesn't recognize me with this beard. I did forget my shaving cream, so I just decided to go for beach beard. And I haven't gotten any texts from anybody about the episode you did last week, so I think that's a win.
Yeah, that is a win. Yeah, we're not worried about you texting Corey any compliments. We're worried about people texting like, "Did you hear what Paul did while you were gone?"
Right. The compliments go straight to Paul. I know, but the
they know I need it.
Come to me.
They know I need it. Well, we got a pretty fun episode today. We're going to be looking at some of the news. Now, the news that has to do with planning, we're not going to be getting into what's going on with Ukraine, Russia, all of that. We know that that stuff is creating volatility in the markets. And we've covered the last two episodes of what this up and down can do to you emotionally, why it is you have to have courage. And we've got a little bit of that in our content today. So we're going to be looking at the secret to braving these wild markets. We're going to talk a little bit about a Fidelity study in an article that was released where the headline was really valuable and the article itself was just about useless. And then we're going to talk about Social Security running out on you. So stay tuned to the end of the episode for that. Corey, let's hit up first this article on the secrets to braving a wild market. You really like this one.
I did, and we've written up some used some articles by Jason Zweig. Really like him. Maybe we'll try to get him on the podcast.
Ooh, wouldn't that be something?
I think that would be. We'll do enough articles on him and send him all the links, or enough podcasts on his articles. Sorry. I'm a little slow coming back from from the beach. So, this article, he's talking about John Templeton. Now, if you recognize the name Templeton, Franklin Templeton, John Templeton, big investor in the early days of what we now know as the market and mutual funds. And this article starts out in World War II. So kind of a similar time of disruption as to what we're starting to feel right now. And the story, this isn't Jason's reporting, this is just how the story normally goes, is John Templeton, young guy at 23, borrows the equivalent of $200,000 today to buy a little bit of 104 different stocks. And right as we're going into the depths of World War II, and that courage to go in at the bottom is what launches him into the investment industry.
And it is funny. So they say at the tender age of 26.
26, yeah.
But we just had to pull this up. So looking at his bio, I was like, what?
And I'd heard some version of this story before about him of being really young. This is familiar, but I never kind of looked up his full history. I think you have the article.
So Templeton started his Wall Street career in 1938. Oh, what did he do before that? He was, he followed his brother's footsteps, attended Yale University, supporting himself during the Depression, and graduating in 1934 near the top of his class as president of Phi Beta Kappa. He was named Rhodes Scholar to Balliol College at Oxford, which he graduated with a degree in law in 1936. Templeton started his Wall Street career in 1938. And so then is the part when the war in Europe in 1939, he borrowed money to buy 100 stocks. So that's the part that came out in the article. But skipping the idea that this guy was incredibly, for the time, well-grounded as a thinker. He wasn't, in law, one thing that you learn is how to assess situations and partially a framework in which to think. So he had that going in, but they certainly frame it, like often happens in these articles, as he was some rube from Tennessee who convinced somebody to lend him the equivalent of $200,000 to be able to go purchase all these stocks.
Now, Jason's point in the article is about having courage in investing. Part of it is for the last decade, as the market's been going up and up and up and up, it's taken a little bit less courage to be an investor because we haven't had to weather these ups and downs. I think the point that we could find from this is Templeton having that grounding in the philosophy of investing, understanding how markets work, gave him the ability to have more courage. Like, I like that story a lot better than the kind of urban legend about him, because we can all do that. Like, education, academic research, and allocation, and that's where we can derive our courage from, because that's what I hear that he did.
Indeed. Well, and you think about what he was investing during, right? It was the Great Depression, then France fell in 41, Pearl Harbor in 42, Nazis rolling across Russia, and then he sold out in 1944 of those positions he bought during the depths of the Depression.
Right.
And he only had 100 stocks. You didn't have the ability to diversify like you can today back then.
Right.
But fundamentally, think about the past history. Corey, you and I talk a fair amount about this idea of, would you ever you wouldn't want to be Rockefeller compared to being a household that makes $80,000 a year today, right? Like air conditioning, running water, like the ability to like literally get, even with these high gas prices, the kind of things you had to do, even 60, 70 years ago, you would do a small mechanic's checkup on your own car before you would drive 500 miles, right? Like you would check the oil. I remember that being a thing when I was a kid, that my dad would check the oil before we went on a long car drive. Like we don't even look at the gas gauge before we leave on a long trip, or pack a cooler of food, because we know there's abundant resources to be able to pull over and get a sandwich anywhere.
Right.
And that just wasn't the case back then. And here we are looking at something like what they had gone through in the terms of investing gyrations. And today it's not nearly as scary as it was. So one way that I cultivate contentment in my own life is looking back to like, I would rather be living today than any time in history, because you look back at, there's a painting that I used to have on the wall of a dentist's office I went to. And it was this beautiful painting of like 16th century French countryside, I think. And there was a couple of people out walking to the river with their laundry and baskets and these small, quaint stone homes. It's beautiful. But what I would think about when sitting in the dentist chair waiting for the doctor to come in is how brutal that existence actually had to be. And we can romanticize that past, and we could do the same thing with our investing, especially if you've only been investing 4 or 5 years. You haven't seen the kind of things that we are going to see over the next, not this time, we don't know when the next big recession is going to happen, but you're going to have a decent sized recession many times over your investing career, unless you just got some really bad news from your doctor.
The only other exception, the other time I might want to live in, is like late 70s, early 80s, when McDonald's still used beef fat for their French fries. Oh my gosh. Because if you haven't had a beef tallow French fry, you were living a shadowy black and white existence compared to the Technicolor that is waiting for you just on the other side of that.
As you were saying that, I'm like, I know Corey isn't going to say the 70s and 80s because of the prevalence of swinger clubs and cocaine. What is this going to be? Of course, it's food.
Beef, fat, French fries.
That's all Corey has to say about this: beef, fat, French fry. Say that 3 times fast. All right, let's hit our next one. This is the news headline that I thought was the making for a great article with absolutely horrid content.
Yeah.
So the headline is, under the personal finance of Fox Business, Fidelity study shows downright ugly retirement moves Americans made over the past 2 years.
And when I first saw this headline, because you sent it to me, I was just like, oh, what does downright ugly look like? Like, what does that even mean? And it's so sensational and then so boring.
Well, and for me, let's think about what those ugly moves are that either we've seen people make before they're meeting with us, or people get tempted to make, that we give them good academic thinking that keeps them from making those bad decisions. Would be exiting out of the market because they were freaked out. The market is up tremendously since the coronavirus pandemic. They're up tremendously since a very, very close presidential race. They are up tremendously even with all of this terrible world news. And we could be headed into a recession. We don't know. But the other things people might have done is bought new cars, cranked up to a larger home unnecessarily because they were dissatisfied with their home after being cooped up for a year at home, working from home. All of those things would have been quality reasons why. And what did they say? People just put their retirement planning on hold.
Right. Not maxing out cash advances on their credit card to play slots or blackjack to try to get out of this, but and they said 55% among young investors age 18 to 35 put their planning on hold. Like 70% of them haven't even started to begin with.
And I gotta say, what really bugs me about these is that they do it by like some polling.
Right.
They're not looking at the calendars of these young investors and saying, oh, I see here on March 3rd, you put your planning on hold, right? you had a meeting with your Edward Jones guy and you said, put on hold till after the pandemic.
Or like for the prior 3 quarters, once a week, you had an appointment on your calendar for work on planning, and then they're gone after March. No,
I about guarantee you that this is a whole bunch of people answering a question where they are shoulding on themselves. Now, we've talked about this on the show before, the idea I should do this, I should do that, and we feel guilty or lacking or vulnerable in some way that I should be further along than I am. So when you're asked by somebody, did you keep your planning going? Did you put your planning on hold? I'm an irresponsible. Now, it doesn't matter what the third one says. It's what you read. What you read is, I'm an irresponsible individual that making no plans for the inevitable future in which I will no longer be able to earn an income and therefore have chosen instead to make irresponsible decisions with that money. It doesn't matter if the third one says, I haven't started planning yet, but that's what people read.
Yeah. I will say, as far as this downright ugly headline, have you noticed Fox News is particularly good at, like, if they're taking a thumbnail of a video, picking the frame with like the worst possible expression on someone's face.
Oh yeah. Well, and the other one I like is I particularly I read several news sources every day. Fox is one of them, and that they'll put a video that has nothing to do with the article. I used to play them and then sit through the 30-second ad, and then I was like, what? This is about Tesla. Like, this is thinking it had something to do with the article. I'm like, you buggers got me to click on this article and click on your video.
Well, or the embedded links that also have nothing to do with the article in the body of the article. They're actually ads. Yeah. And they're not the only ones that do that.
Nope.
But it is frustrating.
But we might as well pick on them while this is the article we're reading. Although inflation emerges, although a majority of Americans express optimism that hangups from the past 2 years are behind them, with 65% of those polled telling Fidelity 2022, this is the year for waving goodbye to the pandemic and looking to the future. Numbers show a new fear has emerged, inflation. Now, this is something we haven't done an episode specifically on inflation. We probably ought to. I'm waiting for when we have a bunch of congressional representatives start talking about wealth tax again, because secret everybody, inflation is the wealth tax. It is diminishing your wealth. So one of the best things that you can do is own assets in an inflationary environment.
Yep.
Because inflation affects the value of assets. Now, for the first time ever, assets that used to go down in value are going up in value. Like I just went, I can't believe this, Corey. So we bought our RV in 2018. It's a 2016. It has gone up in value.
Whoa.
We were at the credit union. So you guys know, we talk to people about getting a home equity line of credit on your home for the just in case. So we got a house with some land kind of well north of Seattle here. And that house needs a home equity line of credit just in case.
Just in case.
And while we're there, he says, hey, you notice you got an RV loan. I wonder if you'd be interested in refinancing that at 3.9%. And I was like, what? I said, we've had that thing like 4 years. We have driven it all over the country. It's got a boatload of miles on it. Can we do that? And he goes, I don't know, let's look. And the value is $10,000 higher than when we got it 4 years ago and having used the daylights out of it. So it is bananas and not up for sale if anybody's asking. Let's go to our next one, Corey, to close us out today. And this is Social Security going to run out of money? Yes.
Yes. Well, and because, headlines like these distract us from the simple fact that it's always been constantly running out of money. There's no giant trust for Social Security growing over time. It's people that are currently working, paying in to send those benefits to people that are currently retired. It's a constant cycle.
Well, and at one point there was and you guys may remember this in the when Gore was running against Bush Jr. I think I've got that right. And they would talk about the Social Security lockbox and all that. It's like Social Security has been, even back then, there was no quote unquote lockbox. There is a journal entry. And then the government was just using the money for other stuff all the time. And it is since ended up that money goes in and goes right back out. And by 2034, they'll only be able to pay 78% of benefits. Now,
if nothing changes.
If nothing changes. But I'll take you guys back to a little over 10 years ago when Social Security stopped sending out statements. Mm-hmm. And it just so happened that the federal government had a federal program that was federally failing. And on the statements in like 2011, 12, maybe 8, somewhere in there is when they started putting on your Social Security statements they would mail to your home, which had your history of earnings and is a big thing we would have clients check to make sure that they got credit. And you guys all should check that income history, make sure it's accurate, because if you don't correct it for 7 years, you just don't get credit. So it's a good thing to check. Now you have to go to ssa.gov and get it. But they stopped sending out those letters 2 years after they had to put on it an asterisk that said this.
Right. This is not new news.
Not new. It's the reason why we don't want to count on it. So, but don't get me wrong, especially for a high income earner, this can be a decent amount of money. If you have a dual income earning household, you got a solid shot of this feeling like you have another 700,000 plus in capital at work. Right. It's nothing to sneeze at, except somebody's going to get left out. And here's what I mean by that. It was initially given to us as a savings program. And I remember my father being upset when I was a kid. It's like, how the heck can they ask me to put my Social Security number on documents? It says right here on my Social Security card not to be used for identification. And it used to be that way. And then it was you're paying into Social Security was the initial thing, because it was supposed to be basically an old person's pension or a widow's fund, as they referred to it at the time. And then it became the Social Security tax. See how they change our language, and now it's a tax. It's a very regressive one because it affects people that make under about $144,000 a year the most. And now then they integrated that if you have other income, Social Security becomes taxable. So that was like their initial dip into means testing Social Security.
Right.
And all they have to do is wait long enough. We might be there now where they're able to start saying to people, well, if you have over this amount of retirement income when you're taking Social Security, we're actually going to lower your benefits.
And they don't actually have to change the formula. They just tax Social Security more, and it lowers the benefit.
That's
right.
exactly.
So they don't have to change that system. They can just, and that's usually how the government does it, right? Add another thing on top of. Now, the other thing they could do, if I'm a politician and I'm thinking, okay, I've got all these constituents, but a giant number of them are retirees, and more people are retiring every year. Who do I want to upset the least? The really big population or the smaller population? And so they could raise taxes, raise Social Security taxes on those still working, and they'll make those people mad, but they'll keep the whole retiree and soon to be retiree population really happy because their benefits stay the same. Or it could be some combination of both.
Yeah, but I totally agree with you. The thing is, it has to happen. And
Right.
you've heard the old saying of kicking the can down the road. Well, that comes from the idea of seeing litter on the road. You could do something about it, but if you just kick it down the road a bit, you don't have to pick it up yet. You just keep kicking it down the road. Well, because this is so politically unpopular, because the solution, let's say there are things that you want to solve, and let's say it's climate. Well, at least half of that argument is going to be popular with somebody. If somebody says the best way to deal with climate change is we need to drill and produce more petroleum products in the United States because the U.S. has the most environmentally friendly and lowest carbon footprint of that kind of stuff. That's going to be popular with one group. And then you have another group that would say, no, we think it should all be solved with renewables. And if you take that stance, it's going to be very popular with that group and unpopular with another group. The solution to Social Security is going to be popular with no group.
Right.
Lower benefits or increase taxes. And no one's going to be happy with either one of those outcomes.
Yeah.
That's why it keeps getting kicked down the road. And so and you can read this article, we'll have the post on our website. You can find it in the link below. But Social Security makes a big difference for a lot of people. But they can't fix it unless they say, well, we need to raise the cap. And that was something that was proposed under the Obama administration, is that they would lift the cap so that you would pay your full Social Security taxes on whatever amount of income you make.
Wow.
So put that in perspective, that would mean the employee pays their 6.2-ish, plus there's Medicare in there too. So let's just call it 7.5. And then there's 7.5 from the employer side. So that's 15%. So if they said, well, we're going to just let that tax go all the way up, you're going to miss that pay raise that you hit about halfway through the year. When you start making more than $144,000, you're not going to get that 7.5% in your check. So that'll be wildly unpopular with both people that are currently making that amount of money or people who think they're going to be able to make that amount of money.
Right.
Or they're going to lower benefits, which is going to be wildly unpopular with anybody, because it will always be marketed by the political opposition as it's going to happen to everybody or they're violating the public trust. And that has been known for a long time, everybody. A long, long time that this is coming. And they continue to not address it because of how politically unpopular it is. The solutions just aren't going to be easy. And so how do you deal with it? You need to be setting aside 20% of your gross income. You need to be a disciplined investor. You need to not make rational decisions in what appears to be an irrational market. You've got to be able to put yourself and your family in the position that you guys are going to be okay, regardless of what happens with Social Security. Now, Corey, before we go,
Yeah.
I'd like to paint a vision for everybody about Social Security.
Okay.
And that is what I'd love to be able to do down the road as our clients continue to retire and they've got their money built up, it's saved up, that we just have a big party in Las Vegas. Okay. People fly in from all over. It's cheap to get hotel rooms. And then everybody brings their Social Security in cash. Okay. Now the big thing is we need to have at least 38 people come. And it's because there's 38 spots on a roulette wheel. 36 numbers plus 0 and double zero.
Double zero, right.
Everybody takes their entire Social Security check and picks a number. And then the wheel spins. And wherever the wheel lands, one of us is going to win. And that payout, if let's say Social Security was $30,000 a year, it's like 36 or 35 to 1, depending if you're playing at a regular casino or Indian casino. I grew up in Las Vegas, guys. This is not like a regular trip I make.
Right.
So if you get, like, you would win this truckload of money, like nearly $1 million. And then what we're going to do is walk over to like the Ferrari dealership. And whoever hit it has to buy a $250,000 car. And then when they drive it, they just post photos to everybody else that was there. When people ask them, "What? How did you get a Ferrari?" They say, "It's easy, Social Security." We're just going to leave people wondering what in the world happened, because I think that's going to be the best outcome we could have for all of our clients, for all of you listening, is that Social Security ends up being like a nice bit of gravy on top. Because we don't want to see our articles like this stress you out. We don't want to see money stress you out. Volatile markets stress you out because you've been prepared for them. You know, it's Corey, this is going to be a slight tangent because I have a lot in my head about this. But imagine if you weren't ready for the way you feel after starting working out again. If you haven't been working out and you start working out and you're sore.
Like painfully sore.
Yeah. And what if nobody prepared you for that? Now think about those feelings. And you would just be freaked out. Like, my body is falling apart. I think I'm dying. I can hardly get out of bed. I am never doing that again. Well, the same thing happens with markets. The same thing can happen with what we read in the news. That if we're not preparing ourselves, if we're not training, not just mentally, training financially to deal with everything that is going to come at us. Because as investors, this Ukrainian Russia thing this is not the end of it. There's going to be something else. There's going to be space wars someday. We're going to be fighting over the moon because we're people and we're flawed. This Social Security thing is going to come up again and again. Taxes are going to come up again and again. More and more government control or lack of government control, whichever of those two stresses you out, are going to come again and again. And if you don't train yourself financially to understand what this means for your money, then we get batted about by whatever the headline is or whatever emotional trigger the media is working on having for us. And what we want here at Sound Financial Group and here at the Your Business, Your Wealth podcast is just for you guys to be prepared for that. So it doesn't stress you out. It doesn't ruin your day. It doesn't ruin your month, and doesn't create disagreements within your household. Because if you find disciplined financial strategies and academic evidence to follow, you're going to be fine. But you're going to be fine because you're not stressed. So anything else, Corey?
It's a great parting thought, Paul.
Awesome. All right, everyone, we're glad to have Corey back. And on behalf of our audience, Corey, we'd like to see that beard get down to like the top button on your shirt. Just let it go. I want full ZZ top if we can get it out of you. All right, everybody. We hope that this episode, as all of our episodes, have been a contribution to you being able to design and build a good life.